Hello, amateurs. Welcome to episode 98 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some wonderful rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host, Tim, and I've got a super special guest for you today. This man is, like myself, a former front row forward. He's an absolute force of positive energy, and he's also Vice President of the Scottish Rugby Union. Please welcome Mr. Keith Wallace. Keith, how are you, sir?
Great, Tim, and good to see you. I hope you're well.
I am well. Thank you so much for your time. So I thought I'd like to start with a topic which I'm sure you'd love to talk about, and that is the current Scotland team performance. Tell me what you're seeing with the current Scotland team.
I think I'm seeing my chuckle muscles hurting the most I've ever hurt, or for a long time, certainly. It was fantastic to be in the top seats at Twickenham and at Murrayfield the last couple of weekends, and just fantastic. I mean, as a fellow piano shifter, I'm sure you know it's the piano players that are worth watching, and boy, have we got some piano players in the Scottish team. Finn's been giving us some master classes, and you watch him live; it's just incredible. You can see the space as a piano shifter, but you could do nothing about it. But he does everything about it and puts the ball into that space. So it's been fantastic. I think the other thing that we should say is the defence has been amazing as well. Twickenham, I think it was 230 tackles and only 9 penalties, which is just incredible. So the Steve Tandy's done a great job there as well, but the team seem to have really got the systems. So that's making it great. It's been glorious, to be fair. Long may it continue. I'm off to Paris next weekend. That'll be fun. And of course, we've got the Triple Crown against Ireland the week after that, so that'll be even better. And who knows? We'll see. It's great to travel in more hope.
Absolutely.
Travel in more hope than normal, I would say.
So tell me, what's the atmosphere around Edinburgh like at the moment? What are people saying? Is there cautious optimism, or people really raising the roof? What's happening?
I think cautious optimism is probably the right thing. I think there's been a frustration that the talent's been there. We haven't yet put it together consistently. So that stat, I think that was the first time since '96 that we'd won the first 2 games in the championship or something like that. I mean, it's just incredible. So we've been inconsistent, but there's been a bit of consistency through the last couple of autumn tests and now. So that's where the optimism is building. I mean, we've got number 1 and number 2, and it's number 2, and number 1 in the world in successive weeks. So that's going to be pretty tough. But I think the great thing is we've got a team capable of playing good rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing some really good rugby. And I just think there's a nice emotional kind of intelligence about the side now as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've cut. The big thing is probably cutting down the penalty count. It makes a big difference as well, because it means you've got more control of the game. You know, we were guilty in the last few seasons of high penalty counts, which mean you get in position and lose position. So the discipline's there in the team as well, and I think that's a great improvement, But it's great to watch. It's also great Murrayfield Saturday, just the whole Doddy Weir thing was fantastic. I mean, I know you did your great 500 miles for Doddy, but it's been pretty close to me as well, and it was just fantastic. I thought the cycle team did amazingly well. Just phenomenal distance to do, and 550 miles in 2 days is astonishing. And some great personal achievements there. Ian Barr, my predecessor, is well, I'm not yet the president, but Ian was immediate past president. Was in Rob Wainwright's team, and Ian had his knee reconstructed during lockdown. So stuff like some great stuff. And for me, particular pleasure was just seeing Gary Armstrong at the post-match function, because Gary's been a huge friend of Doddy's. One of the tributes at Doddy's funeral described him as Batman and Robin. I asked Gary which one was he on Saturday. It's a real honour of mine to have been in their company a couple of times, because they were like 2 10-year-old kids just joshing at each other constantly. And Gary's been an unsung hero in all this, because he's a really kind of unassuming guy, but one of the greats of world rugby in my view, and an even better man looking after his mate Doddy. So quite a big day on that front as well last Saturday.
Yeah, huge day, and Doddy Aid I think has been an incredible success this year, and
amazing.
What
they've achieved is fantastic, so far, and the good thing is it's going to carry on.
Yeah, so let's move on, Keith. I'd love to hear some stuff about your playing days. Tell me about how you got into rugby in the first place, how you developed and what kind of a player you were.
How long have you got? I did play for 50 years. I may have finally played my last game. I'm still deciding. Yeah, I mean, when I was 6, I remember walking past the rugby club in a rugby match in Haddington with my granny, and she said, "Are you going to play rugby when you're older, Keith?" And I said, "No, it's too rough." And then a year later, I got my first pair of rugby boots, and I've been playing ever since, or nearly ever since. So yeah, just my dad was the president of the club. Got me, he was heavily involved. He used to take me to games. I'd be kicking a ball about in the touchline with a couple of my chums. We had mini rugby started at Haddington when I was there about that time by a guy, Bill Hamilton. So we're one of the first clubs to have mini rugby. So I played minis at the club, then played rugby at school. Did a bit of age grade stuff when I was at school. My claim to fame is one game on the bench for Scottish schools. I didn't get off the bench. In those days, it was injuries only. There was a couple of guys in the team that you might know of, Hastings and Soul, who both went on to do better things than I. So that was good. And then I played good club stuff where in those days you had a chance to play against internationalists in the club game, which of course you can't do anymore. So that was probably the highlight for me at that time, was getting a chance to play against some of the lots of internationalists, of which some like Ian Milne, for me, the best tight head the world's ever seen. Played against him when I was 18 as a hooker. The first scrum, I went down against the Bear. I thought, if I lift my leg to hook, I'll die. Such was the pressure, so I didn't lift my foot to hook. I just didn't do anything. I went back 3 years later when I was much stronger in the gym and stuff. I thought this would be better, and I went down the first scrum and I went, oh no. I think it was David Soul in his book described his first scrum against the Bear in 2 words, and he was already a B internationalist at the time. He described his first scrum against the Bear as instant paralysis. And I know exactly what he meant, because there was not so much more the fact that you couldn't move. There was just so much pressure. Played in the same games against the Bear. I played against Andy Irvine. I remember once, the first time when I was 18, I think, lining him up. I thought, this is fantastic. I'm going to knock him into the front row of the stand. I had him absolutely in my sights. I said, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to wipe him out. I didn't touch him. He just changed pace. So that was good. And other times you'd play against an internationalist and you'd think, well, why is he in the team? There's not much more, So it was a kind of great thing to tilt your lance that way. So that was in my early 20s. I then, I moved down south to the Isle of Wight, where I played a form of course rugby, which was great fun. But I used to say, a great place to play rugby, overseas tour every second week. So I've always loved touring, and that was a joy for me. Some great trips, stuff of legend. It's not for public consumption, obviously, but trips to the Channel Islands in particular were pretty something, and great fun. And then when I came back up from the south, I played some first team rugby again, but for the last 30 years or so, I've probably played, or 25 years, I've played in the lower teams, just enjoying the game. And as a front rower, that's the great thing. You can play until you can play until you can't play, which is for me. Just recently, I think I've got the message with a back problem during lockdown, but other than that, it's been great fun. And I guess for me, playing in the lower teams, one, you've no neutral touch judges, so you don't have to. You can do what you want on the opposite side of the scrum from the referee within reason. So that's always been fun. And also, I think we've had a generation of front rowers who. There's no such thing as a hit in the law book. There never was, and it used to annoy me how that was allowed, because it could take out some of the skill of the game. Because sometimes if I was playing against a really big, strong young guy, I would spend all the time just trying to neutralise his hit. But for me, it's all about technique. So the scrum for me is getting in position, and then the weakest point of the scrum is when the hooker lifts his foot. So when I was at my best scrum-wise, that would be when I would go, just at that point is where I'd put maximum pressure on with this, what I call a snap shove. And I've had great fun doing that and just unpicking front rows because of technique. So that's always been a real enjoyment for me. A bit of perverse pleasure, I think, for the opposition. But and I guess a lot of the stories around the referees and such circumstances. I can remember one game where a hooker complained. I was tight end. A hooker complained about me to the referee. Said, "Ref, Ref, he can't do that. And the ref said, I think you'll find he can, and he just has. And then another game where I was against a guy. I was hooking, and I'm not sure this guy had ever hooked before, but he was pretty mouthy, and I was just taking the ball off him all the time, And middle of the second half, he was getting really frustrated. And of course, by that time in my career, I could either play or talk. I couldn't do both because I didn't have enough oxygen. So I usually just used to keep quiet. And if the ref came round to have a look, I'd be all innocent, and the young guys would be mumping and moaning. So this guy was moaning. He said to the ref, did you see that? Did you see what he did? And the ref said, yeah, I thought his technique was excellent. So, it's always good when the ref's on your side. Again, the other one I used to be quite good at, which is you can only do without neutral touch judges, is if the ref happens to go round the opposite side of the scrum, and young scrum halves get a bit over eager, they get a bit too close to the scrum, and you can actually hook the ball out the scrum half's hands. And I've done that several times, and they get so annoyed. And of course, the ref doesn't know what's happened, so you just keep quiet, and off you go. So it's always those kind of moments that you like the most. And I guess I've got a whole truckload of them. I mean, I remember one game when we still had our thirds, and we had a really good thirds of really old players. So mainly guys who'd played first team level at a pretty good standard, but we didn't train or anything. So we could really have our moments, and an Edinburgh team came down to play us with their first team. So one of the junior clubs came down to play us with their first team, and they were warming up, and they had a coach, and they were going through all their drills, and we were busily bandaging ourselves up to get ourselves on the park, and we had the mismatch of shorts and shorts and all sorts of socks, and we looked a real ragtag bunch. And we came out in the dressing room, and you could see these young guys, and they were all puffed up because they'd been through their motions with their coach, and they sort of looked at us and looked down their noses at us. And so we kicked off, and our kickoff went straight out, and it was a line out, and they took the ball off the top of the line out. And to their credit, they worked a brilliant scissors move, perfectly executed. Apart from the fact that the two centres we had out that day were probably the two best defensive centres our club's ever produced. So they did this scissors move, and the guy ran it perfectly, and he got knocked in the middle of next week by one of our centres. And in any other game that season, I'm sure he'd scored a try if he'd executed so well. And you could just see the guy going, where did that come from? And then middle of the second half, our front row was three of us who'd played a lot of first team rugby. Two guys not quite as old as me, but I mean, we'd be all in our 40s. I was probably into my 50s by that time. And we were playing against the young front row that were really keen, and they were trying to bucket, and they were doing everything, and we were just getting a bit annoyed because it wasn't making any difference to us. So in the middle of the second half, I was playing tight. The loose head looked across the scrum and said to me, comfortable there, Keith? I said, yeah, John. He said, like a cup of tea? I said, I bring it across. He said, you want your slippers? Yeah, that'd be nice, And of course, the young guys again, really umpty. And then we go down the next scrum, and John's against his opposition. He said, son, look, you're not going to do anything to annoy me in that position. You need to get your left foot further back, get your right foot over. That's it. Flatten out your backs. He's actually coaching the guy as the game went on. I've said, I think I've said, maybe off the record, that scrumming's about the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So been a great career, and I've had some wonderful, wonderful times in the scrum. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it must have changed a lot over the course of your career. I mean, it's changed a lot in the time that I played. So just sort of talk me through how you kind of adapted and changed throughout the years with all the different scrum laws and techniques and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, when I first started in the 80s, it was pretty brutal. You could scrum, drive in, you could drive up, you could drive down. I mean, I had a season where I got a lot of rib cartilage injuries because the tight head props could bore right in on you, and if you were having to sit across and hook, you were in a really difficult position when the drive came on. So that was, so the scrum cleaned up a lot because of having to scrum straighter and flatter. So that's a good thing. The hit was not a good thing for me, and I think, I'm glad that that's come out of the game a bit more. But even so, even when the hit was on, it's funny, it's hard to describe, but I got to a stage in my career where when you enter in a scrum, and you would go down, I would always go down, just get myself in a good position for the first scrum, but not try and do anything major. I'd just let the scrum go and feel what was in front of me. And you get to a point where you can feel the strength or weakness of your opponents. Or you can tell whether how their binding is, how their angles are. So you get to a point where you just feel that. And then often I would do my worst damage in the second scrum because I hadn't done much in the first scrum. But I know roughly, you know where you're going to attack. And of course, sometimes they think, oh, that old guy didn't do much in the first scrum. So the second scrum was often the best one of all. And it's hard to describe that sense you get of feeling where the pressure is and where the weakness is, feeling how the binding is between the hooker and the prop, for example. But you just accumulate that knowledge, I guess, and use it to your advantage. I remember one of my good club mates, Grant McKelvey, Grant actually played once for Scotland at hooker, a great guy. But Grant referees quite a lot when he can, so he was refereeing a game in the thirds, and I had a second scrum. I'd felt a weakness between prop and hooker, and I was playing tight head, and I just drove really hard between tight head and hooker, and I managed to lift the hooker out up in the air, which I was quite good at, but also bent the tight head backwards, and I ended up both of them backwards, and I fell on top of them. But as I fell on top of them, my calf went. I almost heard it. It pinged like that, and I sort of screamed out. And I ended up lying on top of these two guys, and I couldn't move. And all I could hear was my Grant, the referee, laughing. He's got a Muttley-like laugh, just no sympathy from the ref. And I had to go off. And then you could see the two guys were delighted that I'd gone off. So I mean, this is at a low level, but it's just great fun because you're using all your experience and your technique to have fun. So yeah, that's been great for me. I've really enjoyed that. And so I guess to answer your question, I scrum much the same way as I've always scrummed, which is get yourself in position, get yourself comfortable. If you're not comfortable, don't go down. Concentrate hard, and then looking for that snap when the hooker lifts his foot, either if you're hooking or propping, that's when you really put maximum pressure on. So the other bit for me in terms of lessons learned, when I moved from hooker to prop, and that was because Grant had come into the Haddington team, and he was obviously going to be a better hooker than I ever was. One of my teammates arranged me to meet the Bear to talk about scrummaging, so he was one of my idols, Ian Milne, and I remember it to this day. Firstly, he had the biggest pinstripe suit I've ever seen in my life because he's an enormous man. Secondly, he's very humble, even though at the time I had him as number one in the world at the time. But he said to me that the biggest thing about scrummaging is concentration, and by that he said if you do not concentrate in one scrum and you get unpicked by the opposition, it will take you 5 or 6 scrums to get back in. They'll be lifted, and the momentum will swing. And I've always done that. So I never, since that day, I've tried never to go down to the scrum when I wasn't prepared and ready and concentrated. So, and it's amazing how often you realise that your opponent hasn't concentrated, and that's when you can feel it, and then you go, wow, bang, I'm going to, So that's linked to that feeling whether he's concentrating or not. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. Some great tips in there. Now, big wide question here, Keith. Like, what does the game in general mean to you, and like, what's it brought you over the years?
An immense amount. I mean, I think when my youngest daughter, about 15 years ago, said to me one morning, "Dad, why are you obsessed with rugby?" So guilty as charged, I said, "Well, there's worse things to be obsessed with than rugby, I think it's one of these things that the more you put in, the more you get out. It keeps on giving for me. I've put an awful lot in, but I still get an awful lot back out in all sorts of ways. I mean, now the position I'm in, the thing I get out the most is probably I can sort of help people. I've done a lot of charity stuff, and that's the game giving back, and I've really enjoyed some of that. But it's just, it is one of these things you put in. You have to remind yourself that sometimes as a club president when you're sweeping out the changing rooms or tidying up the kitchen when there's been a flood or something like that, and that's what goes with the territory. But no, it keeps giving back. I mean, I've had a fantastic time playing rugby, traveling. I mean, I think I've played in about 14, 15 countries. I've got friends all over the world. I've played with people of all shapes and sizes, colours and creeds, I find it difficult when people say it's not an inclusive sport because it's always been inclusive for me. I guess when you're in a small town, you play with whoever turns up. You sometimes don't even know what your teammates do, but it doesn't matter. So it's been fantastic for that. I mean, when I'm speaking about the game, I talk about, I think it was 2009 season where My teammates ranged from an unemployed labourer to the ex-chairman of BP to a Kurdish refugee to a Fijian prince to a couple of British Lions, some internationalists, half a dozen sons of dads I'd played with, at least 2 grandsons of dads I'd played with, and a whole load of very average rugby players all in one season, So that's what it's about for me. And we all have this bond, which I call the fellowship of rugby football, So as you and I have, we love that fellowship. So that's for me. I mean, highlights. It's incredible how many highlights I could name. I mean, I did once race the Olympic 100-metre champion because of rugby. How about that for a front row forward?
You're going to have to tell me more about that, Keith.
When I was at school, my PE teacher had a friend who was training with the great Alan Wells, who won the Olympics in 1980. So we went up to Meadowbank, and Wells was doing a series of 50-metre sprints. And in Scotland, there was then a professional sprinting school, which was handicap. So they would handicap, you get a starting handicap, and the person who was the favourite or the fastest would be the back marker, who'd start at the back, and people would be in front of him at different lengths. So from memory, I got a 10-metre start against Wells, and I led him for at least 5 metres before he went past me. So I've actually led the Olympic 100-metre champion in a sprint. But that was it, one race. But anyway, I've raced Olympic champion. I've also scored a try at Twickenham, which is quite a highlight in my career. I was about 46 at the time. I was playing for the Penguins against the House of Lords and the House of Parliament's 15, which was great fun. Doubly so because it was during the expenses scandal in the Parliament, if you remember that. So in the scrums, we were asking them how much they were getting for each scrum and stuff like that. And I would scored a try as a Scotsman at Twickenham. That was quite a rare accolade. So I spent the next 3 to 4 years studiously checking to see if anyone else had scored. So for about 4 years, I was claiming that I was the last Scotsman to score a try at Twickenham, which of course was great in pub quizzes and the likes. Except one of my teammates, when I told him this, saying how much fun I was having saying this, he said, "But Keith, I was playing in the same team as you, and I'm Scottish as well, and I scored after you." So in effect, I'd actually been, for 4 years, I'd been the second last Scotsman to score a try at Twickenham. So that was good. And just been some great moments on and off the park. I mean, we've got coming up with Ireland, for example, we've got the oldest Haddington. We've got the oldest standing surviving Scotland-Ireland fixture, which dates from 1949, and which my dad played in the first fixture. And that's pretty special. We play for the Friendship Cup, and I'll send you a picture for the podcast because the Friendship Cup's been bashed more than the Calcutta Cup was in 1988 with Jeffrey and Dean Richards.
Excuse me, Rugged Boar here. I think you'd probably like to know that the team Haddington play in the Friendship Cup is CYM Rugby, based in Terranure, Dublin. They are a warm, friendly club with 2 women's teams and 2 men's teams. Oh, and I believe they are approaching their 100th year. For those watching on YouTube, you can currently see the beautifully battered Friendship Cup. And for those listening, the photo will be on amateurrugbypodcast.com. Okay, as you were.
What a name for a cup, the Friendship Cup. And the friendships we've got in Ireland are fantastic, some dating back a couple of generations, and they'll be over in 2 weeks' time. I might just get the boots on for 10 or 15 minutes and see how that goes. I'll see how the body's feeling. So stuff like that is hard to explain to people who don't play the game. How much it can give.
Tell me more about that fixture, Keith. How did that come about in the first place?
Oh, you'd love that one. Yeah, as far as we know, it was post-war. In the post-war era, the governments of Scotland and Ireland decided that I'm paraphrasing, but they decided that in these austere post-war times, they encouraged the Irish and Scottish Rugby Union to get clubs together to play fixtures in the interest of promoting social intercourse. So I have to put it to you that never before or since has a government policy been so successful, because we've had the best part of 70 odd years of social intercourse with our Irish friends. And just some fantastic moments. So, in fact, interestingly, the first trip from Haddington to Ireland was an epic voyage. My dad's been dead a long time now, but he told me before he went it was just a fantastic trip. So they had to take a bus from Haddington to Glasgow, which these days would take about an hour. It took them 4.5 hours because there was no bypasses in those days, and they kept running out of beer, so they kept stopping at every pub on the way. They then had to take a boat from Dublin to Belfast, and then a train from the next morning overnight, and then the train the next morning from Belfast to Dublin. So it took them more than a day to get there. And one of the dad's chums is still alive, a guy called Bill Dudgeon. Now, Bill celebrated his 93rd birthday the day of the Twickenham win, so he did say he had rather a good day, as you can imagine. So, and Bill, when I spoke to Bill a few years ago when we were going on, I think it was the 70th anniversary of the fixture, he said, "Oh yeah, I remember the boat trip. It was," he said, "we shared it with the Scottish team and a herd of cattle." He said it was quite an adventure, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah,
Now,
so that the fixture, we had a pause for about 15 years in the middle where when we didn't play the fixture, and they got back together again. But it's just been tremendous. So that, I guess, the Friendship Cup probably sums up what rugby's about for me. And then back to the starting point of the conversation. During lockdown, we couldn't play, so we had an online dinner, which was a bit of a mess because it was completely riotous online instead of a dinner. But we also had an online run where guys, that was a time in lockdown where you're allowed to go out running on your own or with, and we raised about £7,000 for motor neuron disease. So we had a great time online in the middle of lockdown when things were pretty severe, and we raised £7,000. So again, that's what rugby's about for me. You know, that togetherness and helping each other. So that probably one of the great things in my life is taking part in the Friendship Cup. Yeah.
what you're doing to bring the kids through in Haddington?
Well, it's interesting. I guess for me, the more I realise small clubs like Haddington, we're a small town east of Edinburgh. We've had our moments. We've had teams that have we've been in the first division twice in our history, with teams that have stayed together, and usually that's because we've brought a team up through our minis. They've stayed in the club and they've become a very good team. And then in between times we go back down the leagues because we've not got such a strong team. So the moment we're back down in the regional leagues. And I now realise that it's actually not so much about the success of your first team. The role of small clubs to me is to introduce players to our game and hopefully to help them stay in the game somewhere. And that's where I guess our minis have been a huge success over the years. I think I said we celebrated 50 years during lockdown. We weren't sure the exact date, but we know it was roughly of that period. And in fact, our minis have grown in the last couple of years post-COVID, which is great. We're up to about 150 minis, which is primary 1 to 7. I would say that the two highlights in the club calendar for me are opposite ends of the spectrum. We have our minis tournament where we usually have about 600 or 700 kids playing on the same day on the big park that you ran on. And just looking at that is just fantastic. You know, it's just amazing the noise and the fun that's going on. The other end of the spectrum is our Old Goats Lunch, which is the over 75s. The goats are emblem of the club and the town. So we have the Old Goats 15 versus the Old Father Time 15 every year, where I send them out selection cards, because in the old days you got a selection card to say you've been played, and they all turn up for lunch. So the two noises that are great are the noises of the old guys in the corner having all their recollections, and the noises of the minis tournament is just fantastic. These are both lovely noises. And I guess my third favourite noise is simply just the noise of a busy rugby club. You know, it's just that's probably my favourite noise of all, you know. The best sound is the sound of a busy rugby club. So yeah, that's going great. We've got a heavy involvement in the school, got what's called School of Rugby, which is we got our development officer part funded by the SRU, and we provide the coaching and stuff in the school, and the school provide the facilities. So that's pretty important to us as well. So that whole youth side is really very important to clubs like ourselves, and I think that's probably, as I say, the main purpose of clubs like ourselves, to help introduce people to the game. And every so often we produce somebody who goes on and up the teams and plays either semi-professional, professionally, or hopefully internationally. We've done that 5 internationalists so far in our history. We could do with some more soon, but who knows when that'll be. But it's a great feeling when you see your team players playing up the teams. You'd like to get them back, and hopefully they'll come back sometime. And as I said, occasionally they all stay and we get up the leagues again. But that's how it is in a small club. And yeah, it's great. I mean, I was down at the Minis the other week there. We've won a watch. We've got a lovely lady called Amanda Farrow who's just turned up from down south. She's staying with her partner up here, and she's turned up and she's coaching young girls at Minis. And watching her, she's like a sort of Pied Piper. The little girls are just running around on her every word. And so hopefully we'll get a ladies team going again soon. We had one previously in the 90s, but we've not had one since. So just great watching that sort of interaction. So yeah, that's what we do.
Fabulous. It sounds like you're in a pretty healthy place there. And I think it's a really strong point you made there about looking at the long-term effect that a rugby club has on a community and people and the sport as a whole. It's so easy to go chasing league status at the expense of other things. So I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, I think that's been a message that's been coming over. I mean, when that came over when in my vice president campaign, talking to clubs, that the clubs that are doing well in the sustainable side are the ones that are investing in their minis, maybe got a women's team as well, rather than just focusing on their adult male team. You still have to focus on your adult male team, but if you focus too much on that, you're not so sustainable, I don't think.
So the clubs absolutely should try and remain sustainable. But I also understand that we've got another thing in common because I did some coaching out in Africa for a few months, and I know you've done the same. So I'd love to hear about your time in rugby out in Africa.
I haven't actually coached. I don't think anyone would want me to coach them other than maybe show them some tips of front row. But yeah, I've been involved with a club, the Penguins, who are the world's greatest touring team. I think that's in all sports. The Penguins, for a great history, I've not got the stats to hand, but it's something like toured about 80 countries and had players from around the same number of countries playing for them. So a great multicultural organisation. And the original objects of the game was to foster the game worldwide by playing and coaching. So what a great original objective, which is still going on. So the Penguins had coached in Rwanda at about 2010-11 with Craig Brown, the chief exec, who's a good friend of mine, and Frank Haddon, the ex-Scottish coach. I think it was Frank, and Craig's now wife was coaching in that team. We then, the King Penguins, which is the over 35s, which I've been touring with for the last 10 years or so, we played the Rwandans in Hong Kong. They'd been brought over by a great guy, Dave Hughes, an English guy living in Hong Kong and living in Rwanda. And so we played them. So I made my international debut at the age of 46, I think it was, playing against the mighty force of Rwanda. And in fact, in the same tournament, we played the Chinese Army, which is pretty much China as well. So I'm a double internationalist, I guess, at 46. We had a great time with the Rwandans. And you can imagine this was their first time out of Rwanda. And to go to Hong Kong in the middle of the Sevens week from being young guys that had only ever been in Rwanda must have been a complete eye-opener. I don't know if it was that tour, but one of the tours they'd lost a player and there was real panic because, I mean, no mobile phones, no means of getting in touch. They searched everywhere for him, and they eventually found him in a nightclub playing the drums in the band. So, I mean, we just had a great time. So anyway, we pledged as the King Penguins that we'd go and play them sometime. So 3 years later, we took a trip out to Rwanda to play them, and at that time, I'd stepped out of the job I was in. I was looking at things to do, and I thought about setting up a charity, which was maybe a bit big of me. But I realised I found a couple of charities working in Rwanda, one called the Friends of Rwandan Rugby, and got in touch with them, said, look, I'm keen, I'd like to get involved. So when we did the tour in 2014, we did two things. One, we played them, and we did some coaching. And while I was there, I went for a bit longer to help see what they needed from a charity perspective. The game was incredible. We played in the National Stadium. It was the 20th anniversary of the genocide ending. The military were parading up and down. When we got there, they stopped. We played it's a 35,000-seater stadium. The only people watching were some kids from an orphanage that we'd coached out the day before, shouting for us. A few of the family members of the Rwandan team. I managed to sing the Rwandan national anthem before the kickoff, which is pretty amazing for these guys to see a big old white guy singing their anthem in their language, which took me all week to learn because there's sounds that they make that we just don't make, but that was great fun. And we played the game, and we only took the lead with 5 minutes to go and eventually lost. And our average age was about 44, and theirs was about 22 on a bone-hard pitch and about 25 degrees. So it was a huge effort. We then had dinner with the guys, and we paid for dinner. Now, you have buffets in Rwanda, but there's a rule that you're only allowed to fill your plate once in the buffets. So the scrum half filled his plate. It was about the same height as him. I think he ate his own body weight. And so we bought them beer and food, and I think it cost us £10 each, including paying for our own beer and food. And then we went off to a nightclub, and the guys were saying that we were getting ripped off because we were getting charged, I think, from memory, £1.10 a pint when the price was actually £1. So we said, well, you just buy the beer for us. Here's the money, And then we all went to bed because we were knackered, and we left the Rwandans with our kitty. So the next day we were in the hotel, and it was the Hotel Mille Collines, which is a Hotel Rwanda from the film, the famous film. And we were in the swimming pool trying to ease off because we were absolutely busted. And the Rwandans arrived about lunchtime. Some of them arrived at lunchtime, and we said, "Oh, good to see you guys." And they said, "Oh, amazing game yesterday. We thought you guys would crash and burn after 15 minutes." And we said, "No, the competitive spirit burns strong, And they said, "Well done." They said, "But we couldn't last the nightclub." And they said, "Anyway, where have you been?" And they said, "The nightclub." And we said, "No, but it's lunchtime. Where have you been?" They said, "The nightclub." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, they kept it open. They kept it open as long as we had money." So they were in awe of us old guys having played 80 minutes in the baking heat, and we were in awe of them for being in the nightclub all night until lunchtime. So. But since then, I've been involved through the Penguins and others, and the King Penguins. We've been supporting their chief administrator, so funding that each month. Myself and a guy, Tony Penn, who's a fellow Penguin. Tony's a great guy. I think something like 120 games for Taranaki and about 30 games for the Hurricanes. Great player. Tony's been helping on the coaching side. We've taken visit and coaching and coach education and referee education guys out with us to help spread the game. Friends of Rwandan Rugby we work with very closely. They've got about 15 development officers out there funded through that charity. I'll give you links for that for a later podcast. They're great people. And the Holy Grail is to try and get them a pitch, because they've no pitch. They've no resources. I mean, the Federation has very little money. That's like the RFU or the SRU. They've very little money. They've no home. So our Holy Grail is to get a pitch. And that's been going on for about 10 years. Very hard getting land in Rwanda. And every time we find a site, there's something not quite right with it. So one day we'll give them a pitch and a small clubhouse. And it'll be like the start of a rugby club. In the old days, you had a common room and a couple of changing rooms either side. That'll be their home. So that's the dream. And that dream is one, I call that Dina's dream, because Friends of Rwandan Rugby was set up by a great girl, Dina Aiken. From memory, Dina is the first ever Wallaroo, the ladies in Australian Rugby International, because it was done in alphabetical order. So Dina Aiken, A for Aiken, I think she's number 1 in the list. A force of nature. And Dina does run the charity for about 10 years and almost run herself into the ground, to be fair, but managed to hand it over to Glyn and Mary Watkins, who are a Welsh couple, both teachers involved in education, both done voluntary service overseas. So they've picked that up, and they're doing great guns. And I said about giving. Last week I was able to invite them as my guests to the top reception at Murrayfield, just as a little thank you for what they're doing in rugby. So that's the giving back a bit, because they've given a huge amount of their time. So it's great. Rwanda's an amazing country. I mean, I was lucky in business, travelled to more than 30 countries. Of the countries I've gone to and loved the culture, I would say of the countries I've visited in rugby, Rwanda's the most amazing. They say, we love rugby, we can fight on the field, but we're friends off the field. And if you think of that in a country where in 100 days, more people were killed in the genocide than Britain lost in the First World War. And that's in our lifetimes. For them to say, we love rugby, we fight on the field, and you're friends off the field is another great tribute to our game, to my mind. So they're great guys. They have nothing, but they're happy, and we're always trying to help. I mean, just to give you a situation, and maybe once I get my feet under the table, I might be able to influence this at World Rugby. Whilst just during the last World Cup, when England were in the final, there was some suggestions that the English team might share up to £10 million worth of bonuses if they won. I think that was the figure, which is fine, if they won the World Cup. At that time, we were busy trying to scrape some money together for the Rwandans to pay the entry fee for the qualifiers for the next World Cup, for the French World Cup, because they'd been charged an entry fee and they didn't have any money. So between the we just had a whip round amongst the King Penguins. So there's something not quite right with our game where at the very top players, the top players are very well rewarded, which is fine. I get that. But there's huge amounts of money coming into the game, and that money is not trickling down to the Rwandans who are having to pay to take part in the same tournament. So these are things that will take time to fix. But they find that very difficult because they've no money and they want to take part, and yet they're asked with hurdles that are beyond them. And we're not talking huge sums of money, but for them it's a huge sum of money. So anyway, it's been great, and unfortunately at the moment I've got a slight medical condition that I can't travel at the moment. So Tony's going to get back out there soon. I'll get back out as soon as I'm fixed. But it is a really rewarding place to go. And one of the things I'd like to see in rugby is maybe more young people going and having these experiences. I mean, you must have the same coaching in Africa. I know that there's several organisations doing some great stuff in Africa as well. And it just makes you realise how lucky you are by birth, really, So, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, 100% true. I did have some great experiences out there. So what we'll do, people listening as well, link all the things that we've just mentioned there in the show notes below. So if you want to go and find out more stuff about that, then you can do. But Keith, you mentioned there about your role with the SRU. So I'd love to just hear a bit more about that and what you see your priorities are sort of within that role and the game as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I was back in August. I was elected vice president of the Scottish Rugby Union, which is a great honour for our club, actually, to my mind. And there's new governance structure brought in, which has just been launched from the 1st of November, which sees change in the governance structure with a new top board company limited by guarantee, of which I sit on that, with a new independent chair, with the president, Colin Rigby, and the past president, Ian Barr, who I mentioned as one of Doddy's cyclists last weekend. And once we're finished, we'll have 4 custodian directors, independent directors, 2 that we've recruited and 2 who will be ratified by the clubs. So we're in the process of putting that. That will be an oversight board, really looking at strategy, agreeing strategy and overseeing the implementation of strategy, agreeing budget, overseeing the implementation of the budget, appointing the chair, and anything material to the SRU. Because that's really representing the owners, who are, of course, the clubs. So it's still owned by the clubs. Below that, there's the SRL, Scottish Rugby Limited, which is really the commercial operating board, pretty much looking after all the commercial interests of the game. And to the side of that is a new club rugby board, looking after the club game. And as vice president, I chair that club rugby board. And that's a big step forward. That's got ring-fenced funding as a percentage of turnover. And at the moment, that's about $9 million a year, which is money spent on the club game in various forms. And so the clubs will have more of an input through the club rugby board as to how that's spent going forwards. And so we're just getting that set up. It's been great so far, great cooperation with the development team, the hired staff, and it's just finding its feet. So it's really quite exciting. I'm a big corporate governance is one of my big things, as is rugby, as you've gathered so far. But I mean, I've sat on the board of a dozen companies. I'm a chartered director by an institute of directors. I've done theoretical training, and governance is very important. And as you've seen in the newspapers, there's some governance issues in the game. So it's for me, it's fantastic to have the opportunity to combine 2 of my passions, rugby and governance. And if I can do things to help Scottish rugby and the game as a whole, then that's, for me, it's going to be really rewarding. So that's really where we are. And it's very early days. We just actually had our first formal club rugby board meeting at the end of January, so it's just getting started.
It sounds like you'll be a very busy man at the moment then, Keith.
It's probably taken up a big chunk of my time, and I knew it would do that to begin with. And but I like change as well, and I like helping implement change. So I think that will continue for the next 3-4 months, and then it will settle down into the sort of more of a rhythm of board meetings, which is the sort of the cycle of board meetings you want to get into. I'm hoping it will calm down, because if not, I'll have to reschedule some of my other many interests and appointments. But no, it's been great so far.
Excellent. Before we move on to the stash questions, is there anything else you want to say to kind of sum up what we've talked about so far?
Yeah, I mean, I just think of More, no, more. I'm just blessed, actually. Blessed to have played the game for 50 years. Blessed to have been in administration for 40 years, and blessed how much rugby's given me. Just a lifetime of good memories. One or two not so good memories, of course. When it was great. You'll notice in the session when I was talking about scrummaging, I didn't talk about any time when my opponents did for me. Other than the bear, but there's a few times when you're against opponents that you wish you weren't there because they'd found out your weaknesses. So, but no, it's just been fantastic. And as I said, as I've progressed in life, it's been great to be involved in giving something back. So the Rwandan thing is just giving. I mean, I get an awful lot out of that, just helping them. But it's great to help in that way, and it's also that's why it's great to see rugby keeps doing that. The whole Doddy thing, of which I've been a minor part in terms of minor fundraising and your big effort. I think that's a great sign of the strength of the game. Looking after itself, and long may that continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move into the stash questions now. So, what is your favourite bit of stash that you've ever received, Keith?
I was just trying to think about that. Probably when I've been I've been a couple of times as the water boy for the main Penguins in the Hong Kong Tens, which precedes the Hong Kong Sevens. And when that was at its peak, there was a kind of T-shirt for every day of the week, and that was pretty nice, I guess. So there was heavy sponsorship in those days, but there's not so much sponsorship going about. So maybe that was the heyday of that about 10 years ago or so. So I guess that's probably the best there.
Yeah, that'll be fun times there, I'm sure. And what is your favourite kit of all time? So this can be any team from any era.
I would say that some of the kit we've had for the Penguins, we've had them designed for us. The King Penguins is my all-time favourite. We play in a dinner jacket with the open bow tie and the pockets on the stirrup. And whenever we run out, we just look like it just looks like we're the remnants of a great after dinner. So that's pretty special. And then one of the times when we played in Sweden for a celebration match with the King Penguins, the kit was designed with a king penguin on the front, Swedish flag on one shoulder, and the 11 countries of our team, the flags of the 11 countries of our invitation team on the back. That's pretty special. The only thing with that one was we played in a baking hot night in Sweden. We only had 17, and they just kept, it was 3 20s. They kept bringing on a fresh team each 20. And the shirts were so tight we could hardly breathe. So that one's still in the wardrobe, but I don't think I'll have to lose a bit of weight before I get it back on.
Lastly, is there any awful kit that you really dislike at the moment?
I'm a bit of a traditionalist, actually, and I know that teams need a change kit, but I think your kit and your change kit should still be in your club colours, and probably reversed. So I find it really odd if you're watching a team and they're wearing a kit and it's got no resemblance to their club colours. So I'm a club man, and I think your traditions and your heritage are really important. So anytime I see a team playing in the colours that are nothing to do with their club colours, I just find it alien. And that's too many teams for me, frankly. I guess the only other one was the first pink one, I think, was Toulouse, I think it was, or maybe way back when the first really pink one came out. And I remember one of our guys who was a larger fellow had got a hold of one, and it was our sevens where I do the announcements. So I actually managed to say, would Mr. Alan Bell please turn his shirt down? Because he was so big and it was so loud. But no, I like some of that. I mean, I like some of the colour stuff, but I'm a bit of a traditionalist in terms of club colours. Would be the.
Yeah, I think I am too, to be honest. So, Keith, thank you so much for your time. We'll bring this to a close now. But is there anything else you want to add, or any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, it's just to say it's been a great life. I mean, I'm not only have I scored a try at Twickenham, I've held the World Cup. I'll send you that picture for the podcast. That was again through a friend and through a friend of the Penguins. So I don't know many Scotsmen have held the World Cup, but I have. So yeah, little memories like that, and I just great. I mean, it's like when you bump into somebody that you played against 20 odd years ago in the street, and you remember those days. That's just that's the game for me.
Absolutely. Now, if people want to get hold of you, Keith, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, probably through LinkedIn, I guess. Yeah, I don't use social media too much, so yeah, that's probably the way. I'll probably copy your podcast Assuming I
Okay,
like the
and-
podcast, I'll copy on my LinkedIn page.
And Haddington, how's the best way for people to get hold of Haddington Rugby
Yeah,
Club?
I'll give you the contact details for that, and you can actually you can also get me through the president page at the moment. I'm still president, although that's something I need to get out of fairly soon with my workload, unfortunately. So yeah, I'll give you those contact details for the podcast.
Okay, great. So that's at Haddington RFC, and that's on Twitter. And people listening at home, everything that we've talked about today will be available on the show notes, which you can find in one place, and that is amateurrugbypodcast.com. So Keith, very busy man. It's been such a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thanks, and keep up the good work, Tim. It's great. Your run was fantastic, memorable. I was talking to somebody this morning. I was saying I'm about to speak to this guy who left Haddington to run to Galashiels over the hills and made it. So that must have been one of the toughest bits of your trip. So well done.
Amazing, Keith. Thank you so much. Okay, there he goes, Mr. Keith Wallace. What an absolute superstar. Honestly, the man is a dynamo. He did so much for me when I turned up at Haddington, dripping wet. He arranged a group of kids, like 50 of them, to run with me into the clubhouse. There was a lone piper when I arrived. There was baked goods and all kinds of sponsorship going on. It was fantastic. So, and he put me up in his house as well and drove all kinds of things. Keith, thank you so much for everything you did. You're a superstar. Now, what did you think of last week's podcast with Alex Wicks from Old Colfians RFC? Good mate of mine, Wixie. We had a really good chinwag about the old days, and it was there's some really good stuff in there. I'd love to hear your thoughts too, so you can contact me on email, hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. And this week I've launched a new series of content over on the Amateur Rugby Podcast YouTube channel. Well, it's been quite popular. I've been really happy with it. So join me over there where I'm having short chats with special guests about very specific current topics in rugby, such as the ELVs that are being tested in Australia at the moment and the rise of the current island team. So join me again next week on the podcast when my guest will be another fine fellow I met on last year's Great Rugger Run, Mr. Christopher Burns from Cumbernauld RFC. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you could rate and review on your podcast player, like, share, retweet, all that jazz. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. And until next week, get out and play.